The scream cut through the howling wind like a knife through canvas, and Yates Quinn dropped the firewood he had been stacking, his breath freezing in the Montana air as he spun toward his front porch. Through the thick curtain of snow, he could barely make out the shape of a woman collapsed against his door, her body convulsed with pain, one hand reaching desperately toward the handle she could not grasp. He was running before his mind fully processed what he was seeing, his boots crunching through 6 inches of fresh powder that had fallen in the last hour alone. This blizzard had come out of nowhere, as they often did in the winter of 1883, transforming the landscape around his remote ranch into a white wilderness that could kill a person in minutes. "Madam!" Yates shouted over the wind, reaching her just as another contraction seized her body. Her face was pale as death itself, lips tinged blue, and her dress was soaked through despite the heavy coat she wore. She looked up at him with wild, terrified eyes, and he saw that she could not have been more than 20 years old. "I cannot make it," she gasped, her teeth chattering so violently she could barely form words. "The baby is coming now." Yates had delivered foals and calves more times than he could count in his 27 years, but a human baby was different, and the fear that shot through him was unlike anything he had felt facing down rustlers or breaking wild horses. Still, there was no time for doubt. "Hold on to me," he commanded, trying to get his arms under her to lift her, but she cried out and grabbed his coat with surprising strength. "No time," she whimpered, and he realized with a jolt of pure terror that she was right. Even in the screaming wind and driving snow, he could see that the baby was already crowning. His mind raced through impossible options, but there were no good choices, only one that might keep them all alive. He ripped off his heavy coat and threw it over her lower body, then yanked open his front door with one hand while supporting her with the other. "We have to get you inside at least to the threshold," he said urgently, and somehow, through her pain and exhaustion, she managed to help him drag her forward until she was half in his cabin, the warmth from his fire rushing out to meet the bitter cold. He positioned himself to catch the baby, his hands shaking not from cold but from the weight of responsibility, and when the woman screamed again and pushed, he was there. The baby slid into his rough, calloused hands in a rush of fluid and blood. So small and fragile he was terrified he might drop it. For one horrible second, the infant did not make a sound, and Yates thought his heart might stop. But then he rubbed the tiny back as he had seen his mother do once when he was a child, and the baby let out a thin, reedy wail that was the most beautiful sound he had ever heard. "It is a boy," he said hoarsely, wrapping the infant in his coat and carefully placing him in the mother's trembling arms before he finally managed to get them both fully inside and kick the door shut against the storm. The sudden silence was deafening, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the woman's labored breathing. Yates stood there for a moment, his shirt covered in blood and snow, staring at the scene before him as if he had stumbled into someone else's life. Then training took over and he moved quickly to grab blankets from his bed, towels from his kitchen, water from the kettle he kept warm by the fire. The woman was fading. He could see it in the way her eyes kept closing, in the pallor of her skin. "Stay with me," he said firmly, wrapping her in blankets and checking to make sure the bleeding was not excessive. He had no idea if what he was seeing was normal, but she was not hemorrhaging, which seemed like the best he could hope for. The baby had stopped crying and was making small snuffling sounds against his mother's chest. "What is your name?" "Beatrice," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Beatrice Reeves. We were traveling to my sister's place near Fort Benton. The wagon broke down miles back and my husband went for help, but then the pain started and I could not wait. I walked. I do not know how far." Her words tumbled out in a confused rush, and Yates realized she was probably in shock. "Your husband is out there?" Yates asked, alarm shooting through him. No one could survive long in this storm. "He took the horse," Beatrice said, and tears began sliding down her cheeks. "That was 3 hours ago, maybe more. The baby was not supposed to come for another 2 weeks." She looked down at the infant in her arms with a mixture of love and desperation that made Yates's chest tighten. "I kept walking because I saw your light through the snow. If I had stopped, we both would have died." Yates looked toward the window, where the blizzard raged with no sign of letting up. He had lived in Montana territory long enough to know that storms like this could last for days, and the temperature outside was dropping fast. If Beatrice's husband was still out there, his chances were slim unless he had found shelter. "I will look for him when the storm breaks," Yates promised, though he suspected it would be a recovery mission rather than a rescue. "Right now, I need to take care of you and your son." He set about making Beatrice as comfortable as possible, moving her to his bed since it was the warmest spot in the cabin, building up the fire until the small space was almost too hot, preparing broth from the venison stew he had made the day before. She was too exhausted to do more than take a few sips, but he insisted, and gradually, some color returned to her face. The baby nursed, and Beatrice cried again, this time from relief rather than fear. Yates busied himself cleaning up the mess by the door, burning the soiled rags in the fire, trying not to think about how intimate this all was, how strange to have a woman in his home after 3 years of solitude. He had bought this ranch with money saved from years of working cattle drives, choosing the remote location deliberately, because he had grown tired of people and their complications. His parents were dead, his brother had moved to California, and the woman he had once thought he would marry had chosen someone else. The isolation had suited him, or so he had told himself during the long winter nights when the silence felt like a physical weight. Now, with a woman and child filling his cabin with soft sounds and the sweet smell of milk, he realized how lonely he had actually been. Night fell, though it was hard to tell with the constant white-out conditions outside. Yates made himself a bed on the floor near the fire and tried to sleep, but every sound from the bed made him jolt awake, checking to make sure Beatrice and the baby were breathing. Around midnight, she called out softly, and he was on his feet instantly. "I am sorry to wake you," she said, and in the firelight he could see that she looked better, more alert. "I realized I never thanked you properly. You saved our lives." "Anyone would have done the same," Yates said gruffly, uncomfortable with her gratitude. "That is not true," Beatrice replied, shifting the baby to her other arm. "Many men would have turned away, not wanting the trouble. You did not hesitate." She paused, studying his face. "You are not married." "No, madam. Please call me Beatrice. After everything, formality seems silly." She smiled slightly. "I am married, though I do not know if I am a widow." The smile faded. "Thomas, my husband, he was not a bad man, but he was reckless, always sure that everything would work out, that his plans were sound even when they clearly were not. This trip was his idea. I wanted to wait until after the baby came, but he insisted we could beat the winter storms." Her voice turned bitter. "He was wrong, and now he might be dead, and I am in a stranger's home with a newborn son and no idea what happens next." Yates settled onto the edge of the chair he had pulled near the bed. "What happens next is you heal and get strong. The storm will pass and then we will figure out the rest. You make it sound simple. It is simple, even if it is not easy. I have lived through enough winters out here to know that worrying about tomorrow does not change it. You handle what is in front of you." He gestured to the baby. "What will you name him?" Beatrice looked down at her son, and her expression softened. I thought Thomas would want to choose, but now I suppose it is up to me. My father's name was Samuel. He was a good man, strong and kind. Samuel Reeves. Yes, I think that fits." The baby made a small sound as if in agreement, and despite the gravity of the situation, both adults smiled. In that moment, something shifted in the cabin, a sense of rightness settling over the space like a blanket. Yates felt it but could not name it, and when Beatrice's eyes met his across the flickering firelight, he wondered if she felt it too. The storm continued through the next day and into the following night, one of the worst Yates had seen in his years at the ranch. He kept the fire roaring, ventured out only to bring in more wood from the covered pile and to check on his horses in the barn, making sure they had feed and water. Beatrice grew stronger hour by hour, and by the second evening she was able to sit up and eat a proper meal. The baby, little Samuel, seemed healthy and vigorous despite his dramatic entrance into the world, and Beatrice marveled at how well he was nursing. They talked during those long hours, tentatively at first, then with growing ease. Beatrice told him about her childhood in Ohio, how she had met Thomas at a church social when she was 17, how he had swept her off her feet with promises of adventure and a new life in the West. They had married within 6 months and headed west immediately, but the adventure had been more hardship than romance. Thomas had tried his hand at mining, at farming, at several schemes that always seemed to fail. They had been living in a boarding house in Helena when Beatrice discovered she was pregnant, and Thomas had decided they should go to Fort Benton, where Beatrice's sister lived, thinking family help would be useful. "I have not seen Marion in 5 years," Beatrice said sadly. "I do not even know if she still lives there or if she will welcome us. Thomas said it did not matter, that we would figure it out." She shook her head. That was his answer to everything. Yates found himself growing angry at this Thomas, who had dragged his pregnant wife across the territory in winter with half-formed plans and reckless disregard for danger. But he kept his opinions to himself, and instead shared his own story. He told her about growing up on a ranch in Texas, about learning to work cattle from his father, about the drive that had brought him north to Montana, and how he had fallen in love with the brutal beauty of the landscape. He told her about buying this land, about building the cabin with his own hands, about the satisfaction of creating something entirely his own. "It sounds lonely," Beatrice observed, and Yates could not deny it. "I thought I wanted to be alone," he admitted. "But maybe I just wanted to be away from the wrong people." She tilted her head, considering him. "And now you are stuck with strangers in your home. You do not feel like strangers anymore." The words hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning neither was ready to fully examine. Beatrice looked away first, color rising in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the warmth of the fire. Yates felt his own face heat and stood abruptly, muttering something about checking the horses again, even though he had done so an hour before. Outside, the wind had finally begun to die down, though the snow still fell steadily. Yates stood in the barn, his breath steaming, and tried to sort through the tangle of feelings in his chest. He barely knew this woman. She was married, or possibly widowed, and had just given birth to another man's child. There was no future here, no possibility of anything beyond the care he would provide until she could move on to her sister, or wherever she decided to go. And yet, when he thought about the cabin empty again, about Beatrice and Samuel leaving, something inside him rebelled against the idea with a fierceness that took him by surprise. He stayed out longer than necessary, giving himself time to regain his composure, and when he returned to the cabin, Beatrice was asleep with Samuel tucked safely beside her. Yates added wood to the fire and lay down on his makeshift bed, but sleep was a long time coming. The storm finally broke on the third morning, revealing a world transformed into a crystal wonderland of snow and ice. Drifts reached as high as the cabin windows in places, and the sky was a brilliant, painful blue. Yates knew what he had to do, even though every instinct told him to delay. He saddled his strongest horse and told Beatrice he was going to backtrack the direction she had come from, looking for her wagon and any sign of her husband. "Be careful," she said, and the concern in her eyes made his heart ache. "I always am," he replied, and set out into the blinding white landscape. He found the wagon 3 miles south, nearly buried in snow, abandoned and broken just as Beatrice had described. There were signs that someone had tried to make repairs before giving up, and a trail of horse tracks leading northwest, away from the direction of Yates's ranch. He followed them for another 2 miles until they disappeared into a creek bed. Yates searched the area thoroughly, checking the obvious places someone might seek shelter, but found nothing. Either Thomas Reeves had kept moving and was long gone, or the storm had claimed him and his body would not be found until spring thaw. Yates returned to the wagon and salvaged what he could, loading Beatrice's trunk and a few other belongings onto his horse. Among the items, he found papers that confirmed their story, letters addressed to Thomas and Beatrice Reeves, and a small Bible with a marriage record dated 1880. He also found something that made his stomach sink, a bundle of letters from a woman in Helena, passionate letters that made it clear Thomas had been involved with someone else. Yates almost left them, but something made him pocket them instead. Beatrice deserved to know the truth about the man she had married, even if that truth was painful. It was nearly dark when he made it back to the ranch, exhausted and half frozen despite his heavy clothing. Beatrice met him at the door, and he could see the question in her eyes before she asked it. "I did not find him," Yates said heavily. "I found your wagon and salvaged what I could, but the trail disappeared. He either kept going or the storm got him." Beatrice nodded slowly, and tears welled in her eyes, but she did not break down. "I think I knew," she said quietly. "Part of me has known since he rode away. Thomas was not built for this country. It was going to kill him eventually, one way or another." Yates wanted to comfort her, to pull her into his arms and promise that everything would be all right, but he kept his distance and simply set down her trunk. "I am sorry." "Do not be," Beatrice said, wiping her eyes. "You have done more for me than anyone had a right to expect. I will figure out what to do next once I am strong enough to travel." The days that followed fell into an unexpected rhythm. Beatrice recovered with remarkable speed, and soon she was helping around the cabin despite Yates's protests that she should rest. She cooked meals that were far better than anything he had managed for himself, mended his clothes, and organized his chaotic living space with an efficiency that both impressed and slightly embarrassed him. Samuel thrived, growing noticeably in the weeks after his birth, and Yates found himself fascinated by the tiny human who had entered the world in such dramatic fashion. He carved a cradle for the baby from pine wood, working late into the night to get the details right, and when he presented it to Beatrice, she cried and kissed his cheek in thanks. The touch of her lips burned like a brand, and Yates lay awake that night thinking about her in the next room, about how right it felt to have her there, about how impossible the whole situation was. Winter deepened, and travel remained difficult. Yates knew he should make an effort to get word to Beatrice's sister, to arrange for her transport to Fort Benton, but he found reasons to delay. The roads were too dangerous, the weather too unpredictable, better to wait until spring. Beatrice did not push, and Yates told himself she was simply being practical, not that she might have her own reasons for wanting to stay. They were both dancing around the truth, and it could not last forever. The confrontation came in early February, during a brief warm spell that turned the snow soft and brought the promise of eventual spring. Beatrice was outside hanging laundry, and Yates was repairing a fence when she suddenly called his name. He hurried over to find her holding the bundle of letters he had taken from the wagon, her face white with shock and hurt. "I was looking for thread in my trunk," she said, her voice shaking. "I found these pushed down in the corner. Did you put them there?" Yates could have lied, but he would not disrespect her that way. "Yes, I found them in the wagon and did not know what else to do with them. I am sorry." Beatrice looked down at the letters, at the evidence of her husband's betrayal written in another woman's hand. "How long do you think it was going on?" "Based on the dates, at least 6 months before you left Helena." She laughed, a bitter sound with no humor in it. "I was pregnant with his child and he was with another woman. All those times he said he was working late or meeting with potential investors." She crumpled one of the letters in her fist. "What a fool I was." "You were not a fool," Yates said firmly. "You trusted your husband, as you had every right to do. He was the one who broke that trust." "It does not make me feel less stupid," Beatrice said, but her voice had lost some of its sharp edge. She looked at Yates, really looked at him, and he saw something in her expression shift. "You have been so good to me, to Samuel." "Why?" The question hung between them, demanding honesty. Yates took a deep breath and decided to give it to her. "At first, because it was the right thing to do, because no decent man could have turned you away. But now—" He stepped closer, close enough that he could have reached out and touched her if he dared. "Now it is because I have come to care for you both. Because the thought of you leaving tears me apart inside. Because when I think about the future, I cannot picture it without you in it." Beatrice's eyes widened, and for a moment she did not speak. Then she said very softly, "I am a widow with a newborn child. I have nothing to offer you. No dowry, no prospects, nothing but trouble and complication." "You are wrong," Yates said, and now he did reach out, taking her hand gently in his. "You have yourself, and that is everything I want. You are strong and brave and kind. You make this cabin feel like a home instead of just a place to sleep. When I hear Samuel cry, I smile instead of being annoyed. When I see you in the morning, my whole day feels brighter." He paused, searching for the right words. "I know this is fast, maybe too fast. I know you have been through hell and probably need time to heal. But I want you to know that if you choose to stay, if you want to build a life here with me, I would count myself the luckiest man in Montana territory." Tears were streaming down Beatrice's face, but she was smiling. "I have been so afraid to hope," she whispered. "I have been so afraid to let myself feel what I have been feeling. It seemed wrong with Thomas barely gone." "Thomas made his choices," Yates said. "He chose to risk his life in a storm rather than stay with you. He chose another woman over his wife. You do not owe his memory more than basic respect." Beatrice nodded slowly, and then she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him, pressing her face against his chest. Yates held her carefully, as if she might break, and felt something long frozen inside him begin to thaw. They stood there in the winter sunlight, surrounded by melting snow and wet laundry, and made silent promises to each other. That night, after Samuel was asleep in his cradle, they sat together by the fire and talked about the future in concrete terms. Yates wanted to make sure Beatrice understood what life on the ranch would be like, the isolation and hard work, the long winters and short summers. Beatrice wanted to make sure Yates understood that Samuel would always be part of the package, that she could not and would not choose between them. "I would not want you to," Yates assured her. "I may not be his father by blood, but I can be his father in every way that matters if you will let me." "I would like that," Beatrice said, and then added hesitantly, "but there is one more thing we need to discuss. My marriage to Thomas." Legally, I am still his wife, even if I believe he is dead. I do not know how long it takes to have someone declared dead when there is no body." Yates had not thought about that, and he frowned. "I suppose we will need to find out. I can ride into town when the road's clear and talk to the judge." "And in the meantime?" Beatrice asked. "I do not want to live in sin, Yates. I have strong faith, and it matters to me that we do this properly." "It matters to me too," Yates said. "We will do this the right way, whatever that takes." As it turned out, Montana territory law required a 7-year waiting period to have someone declared dead without a body, which was far too long for either of them to contemplate waiting. But when Yates explained the situation to the circuit judge who passed through in early March, the man had a suggestion. "Given the circumstances of his disappearance in the blizzard, and given that you searched and found evidence he left the area, we might be able to get a special dispensation," the judge said thoughtfully. "It would help if someone made an official report that he was seen heading away from the area before the worst of the storm hit, and if there was evidence he had abandoned his wife." Yates thought about the letters and mentioned them carefully. The judge nodded. "Bring those to me, along with Mrs. Reeves's testimony, and I will see what I can do. It may take a few months, but I believe we can sort this out." It took until June, 3 months of waiting during which the snow melted and spring transformed the landscape into a carpet of wildflowers. Beatrice officially testified that Thomas had left her during the blizzard, that he had taken the horse and supplies and headed in a direction that would not have led to help, and that his last words had indicated he did not intend to return quickly. The letters provided evidence of infidelity and abandonment of responsibility. In the end, the judge ruled that Thomas Reeves was legally dead, having perished in the blizzard of January 1883, and that Beatrice was free to remarry. They were married in late June at the small church that served the scattered ranching community, with a handful of neighbors as witnesses and Samuel, now 6 months old and fat-cheeked and happy, present in Beatrice's arms. Yates stood at the altar in his best suit, which he had not worn since he bought the ranch, and watched his bride walk toward him in a simple blue dress. She had sewn herself from fabric he had bought in town. She was beautiful, more beautiful than any woman he had ever seen, and when she smiled at him, he felt his throat tighten with emotion. The preacher spoke about commitment and faith, about building a life together through hard times and good, and when Yates said his vows, he meant every word with an intensity that shook him. Beatrice's voice was steady and clear when she promised to love and honor him, and when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Yates kissed her gently, mindful of their audience but unable to completely hide the depth of his feelings. The celebration afterward was simple but joyful, with food brought by neighbors and music played on a fiddle that had seen better days. Yates danced with his wife, whirling her around until she laughed breathlessly and begged for mercy. Samuel was passed from arm to arm, cooed over and admired, and when an elderly woman commented that he looked just like his father, referring to Yates, neither of them corrected her. That night, alone in the cabin that was now truly their home, Yates and Beatrice came together as husband and wife with a tenderness and passion that surprised them both. Afterward, lying in the darkness with Beatrice's head on his chest and Samuel sleeping peacefully in his cradle nearby, Yates felt a contentment so profound it was almost painful. "I love you," he whispered into her hair and felt her smile against his skin. "I love you too," she replied. "Thank you for catching me when I fell. Thank you for catching Samuel. Thank you for giving us a home." "You gave me more than I gave you," Yates said. "You gave me a reason to be more than just a man alone in the wilderness." Life settled into a new pattern after that, one marked by hard work and simple pleasures. Beatrice proved to be as capable on the ranch as she was in the home, helping with the horses and chickens, learning to shoot well enough to protect herself and Samuel if necessary, and managing the household accounts with a skill that impressed Yates. Samuel grew strong and healthy, taking his first steps at 10 months and speaking his first word, which was not quite mama or dada, but somewhere in between, at a year old. Yates proved to be a devoted father, teaching Samuel to ride before the boy was barely steady on his legs, showing him how to gentle horses with patience instead of force, and telling him stories at bedtime about the Old West and the adventures Yates had experienced. When Samuel cried at night, Yates was often the first one up, walking the floors with the baby until he settled. Their second winter together was hard, with harsh cold and several heavy snowstorms, but they were prepared and well provisioned. Sitting by the fire while the wind howled outside, Beatrice would sew or read aloud from one of the few books they owned, and Yates would work on repairs or carve small toys for Samuel. Those long evenings were among Yates's favorite times. The three of them cocooned together against the cold, safe and warm and loved. In the spring of 1885, Beatrice discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was planned and welcomed, and Yates hovered over her with an anxiety that both touched and exasperated her. "I have done this before," she reminded him, laughing. "And I had an excellent midwife the last time, even if he did not know what he was doing." "I knew enough," Yates said, but he still insisted she rest more than she wanted to and nearly drove her mad with his protectiveness. When her labor started in early October, Yates did know what to do this time, having spent months reading every book on childbirth he could get his hands on and consulting with the doctor in town. Even so, his hands shook as he helped her through the contractions, and when their daughter finally arrived after 8 hours of labor, he cried openly at the sight of the tiny, perfect infant. "She is beautiful," he breathed, carefully cleaning his daughter and wrapping her before placing her in Beatrice's arms. "She looks just like you." "She has your chin," Beatrice said, exhausted but radiant. "What should we name her?" They had discussed names for months, but suddenly none of them seemed right. Yates looked at his wife, at the woman who had literally fallen into his life during a blizzard and changed everything, and knew what the name should be. "Grace," he said. "Her name is Grace because that is what you brought into my life." Beatrice's eyes filled with tears. "Grace Quinn. Yes, that is perfect." Life with 2 children was chaotic and exhausting and wonderful. Samuel, now 2.5, was fascinated by his baby sister and wanted to help with everything, though his help was often more hindrance. Still, Yates and Beatrice encouraged his involvement, teaching him to be gentle and patient and watching the bond between the siblings grow. The ranch prospered over the following years. Yates's hard work and Beatrice's shrewd management allowed them to expand their herd and improve their property. They added a room onto the cabin, then another, until it was a proper house. They hired occasional help during busy seasons, and Yates became known in the area as a fair employer and an honest dealer. Samuel grew into a sturdy, cheerful boy who loved the ranch life and showed every sign of following in Yates's footsteps. Grace was quieter but equally determined, and from an early age, she insisted on doing everything her brother did, much to Samuel's occasional annoyance. When Beatrice became pregnant again in 1887, they both hoped for another boy to balance out the family. But their third child, born in April of 1888, was another girl, this one with Yates's dark hair and Beatrice's green eyes. They named her Rose, and she completed their family in a way none of them had quite expected. Samuel took his role as big brother seriously, and Grace was thrilled to have a sister close to her age. The years passed in a blur of seasons, each bringing its own joys and challenges. There were hard winters and dry summers, sick livestock and good harvests, moments of fear and countless moments of happiness. Through it all, Yates and Beatrice remained deeply in love, their bond strengthening with each shared experience. Samuel learned the truth about his birth father when he was 8 years old. He had been asking questions about why he looked different from his sisters, and Beatrice decided it was time to tell him the story. She explained about Thomas, about the blizzard, about how Yates had caught him and saved them both. "So Papa is not really my papa?" Samuel asked, and Beatrice could hear the confusion and hurt in his voice. "Yates Quinn is your papa in every way that matters," Beatrice said firmly. "He is the man who caught you when you were born, who held you when you cried, who taught you to ride and to be kind and to work hard. The man who gave you his name and his love. Biology is just one small part of being a father." That night, Samuel went to Yates where he was working in the barn and asked directly, "Mama told me about my birth father. Are you sorry you are stuck with me?" Yates set down the harness he had been mending and pulled Samuel into a tight hug. "I have never been sorry for a single moment," he said fiercely. "You are my son, Samuel. You have always been my son, from the moment I caught you in that blizzard. Nothing will ever change that." Samuel hugged him back just as tightly. "I am glad you are my papa," he whispered, and Yates felt tears prick his eyes. "I am glad you are my son," he replied, and meant it with every fiber of his being. The family continued to grow and thrive. When Samuel turned 18 in 1901, he surprised no one by announcing he wanted to stay on the ranch and work with Yates. Grace had married the previous year to a neighboring rancher's son, a good man who treated her well, and Rose was still in school but showed signs of wanting to become a teacher. Yates, now 45 years old, looked at his life and marveled at how different it was from what he had imagined all those years ago when he had chosen isolation and solitude. His hair was graying at the temples, and his body bore the scars and aches of decades of hard physical labor, but he had never been happier. Beatrice, at 38, was still as beautiful to him as she had been that first night, though her face bore laugh lines now and her hands were calloused from work. She often told him that he had saved her life, but he knew the truth was more complicated. They had saved each other, two lost souls who had found each other in the midst of a storm and built something beautiful from that desperate beginning. On their 20th wedding anniversary in 1903, Yates surprised Beatrice with a gift he had been secretly working on for months. It was a painting, done by a traveling artist Yates had commissioned and provided with detailed descriptions and rough sketches. The painting showed a scene from that first night, with a younger Yates on the porch catching a baby while snow swirled around them, and a woman collapsed at his feet. But the artist had added something that had not been there that night, a light glowing from inside the cabin, warm and golden, symbolizing the home and love that would grow from that moment. Beatrice cried when she saw it, and they hung it over the fireplace in a place of honor. Whenever someone asked about it, they would tell the story about the blizzard and the birth and the love that had grown from impossible circumstances. Samuel eventually married a woman from town, a smart, capable girl named Ellen who fit into the family as if she had always been there. They had 4 children of their own, and Yates and Beatrice delighted in their role as grandparents. Grace and her husband added 3 more grandchildren, and Rose eventually did become a teacher, though she never married, claiming she was too busy shaping young minds to worry about a husband. In 1910, on a warm summer evening, Yates and Beatrice sat on the porch of their house and watched the sunset paint the Montana sky in shades of gold and crimson. Samuel was running the ranch with his wife. Grace lived close enough to visit weekly, and Rose had just accepted a position at a new school being built in town. The next generation was secure and thriving, and Yates felt a profound sense of peace. "Do you ever think about what might have happened if you had not been home that night?" Beatrice asked, her hand in his as they rocked gently in chairs Yates had built decades ago. "Sometimes," Yates admitted, "but not as much as I think about how grateful I am that I was home, that I heard you, that I was able to catch Samuel." He squeezed her hand. "Everything good in my life comes from that moment." "Everything good in my life too," Beatrice agreed. "Though I think we made our own happiness, Yates. That night gave us a chance, but we chose to take it. We chose each other." "Best choice I ever made," Yates said, and leaned over to kiss her, as comfortable and natural as breathing after all these years. They sat together as darkness fell, listening to the sounds of the ranch, the horses moving in the pasture, the distant call of a coyote, the soft murmur of voices from inside where Samuel and Ellen were putting their children to bed. This was their legacy, this life built from a moment of desperate need and compassionate response, this family forged in a blizzard and tempered by time. Yates thought back to the man he had been, alone and convinced he wanted nothing else, and could barely recognize himself. That man had been hiding from life, protecting himself from pain by refusing connection. The woman who had collapsed on his doorstep in the middle of a storm had forced him back into the world, and he would be forever grateful. "I love you," he said to Beatrice, as he had said countless times over the decades, and as he would continue to say for whatever years they had left. "I love you too," she replied, the same words she had spoken on their wedding night and every day since. And as the Montana stars came out one by one above them, lighting up the vast sky that had witnessed both their struggles and triumphs, Yates Quinn knew with absolute certainty that he was exactly where he was meant to be, with exactly who he was meant to be with. The blizzard that had brought Beatrice to his door had been the storm that changed his life forever, and he would not change a single moment of what followed, not even the hard times, because all of it had led to this perfect peace, this complete contentment, this love that had grown from the most unlikely beginning into something eternal and unshakable.